Jake Morrison yawned as he floated through the command center of Luna Defense Station. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago, but he kept sipping it anyway. Outside the thick windows, Earth hung like a blue marble against the black of space. It was beautiful, but Jake had seen it 1,000 times before. Another exciting day protecting humanity. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Amy Walsh, joked as she drifted past. She was reviewing the same sensor readings they checked every day. Nothing ever happened out here. Jake had been stationed on Luna Defense for 3 years. Before that, he spent 5 years on patrol duty around Mars. The Terran Defense Force was a good career, but it was boring. Humanity had been at peace for over a century. The most dangerous thing Jake had dealt with was a cargo ship with faulty engines. "Sir, we're getting a message from Admiral Sullivan," Amy called out. "She wants to speak with all station commanders." Jake pushed himself over to the communications console. Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared on the screen. She was a tough woman, in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes. Jake had met her once at a military ceremony. She seemed nice enough, but there was something about her that made him think she knew more than she let on. "Commanders," Sullivan began, "I want you to run a full systems check on all defensive platforms. Make sure everything is working properly." Jake frowned. "Any particular reason, Admiral?" Sullivan paused for a moment. "Let's just say it's good to be prepared. Check your weapon systems, your shields, your communications, everything." The message ended, leaving Jake confused. Luna Defense Station had weapons, but they were old and mostly for show. The station's main job was to track space traffic and help ships that got into trouble. The weapons hadn't been fired in decades, except for testing. Meanwhile, on the agricultural world of New Kansas, Lisa Parker was having her own busy day. She stood in the middle of a vast wheat field, talking to farmers through her headset. New Kansas fed 17 different star systems, and keeping track of all that food was a big job. "Tom, how's the harvest looking in Sector 7? She asked. "Good, Lisa. We'll have everything ready for transport by next week," came the reply. Lisa smiled. She had been born on New Kansas, and she loved the wide open spaces and the smell of growing crops. But she was also good with numbers and logistics. She could track 1,000 different shipments in her head and never lose count. Her assistant, a young man named Bobby, came running up with a worried look on his face. "Lisa, we're getting some strange reports from the outer colonies. Some of the trading ships are reporting unusual activity near the border systems." "What kind of activity?" Lisa asked. "Unknown ships. Big ones. They're not responding to communications." Lisa felt a small chill run down her spine. In her 35 years, she had never heard of anything like that. Space was big, and there were always ships moving around, but everyone followed the same rules. You identified yourself, you stated your business, and you moved along. "Keep monitoring the situation," she told Bobby, "and make sure all our food shipments are on schedule. If something is happening out there, people are going to need to eat." Deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Ben Carter was having a very different kind of day. He worked in a facility that officially didn't exist, maintaining systems that officially weren't there. Ben was a quiet man in his 40s, with thick glasses and hands that were always dirty from working with machinery. The facility was old, built during Earth's nuclear age, when humans were still learning how to kill each other efficiently. Most people had forgotten places like this existed. Ben was one of only a dozen people who knew the truth about what was hidden beneath the Earth. He walked through corridors lined with massive machines that hummed quietly in the darkness. These systems had been running for over 200 years, waiting for orders that never came. Ben checked their status every day, ran diagnostics, replaced worn parts. It was important work, even if no one ever thanked him for it. His supervisor, an older woman named Carol, found him in the main control room. "Ben, we just got a priority message from Earth Command. They want us to run a full systems check." Ben looked up from his work. "All systems?" "All of them, the big ones too." Ben felt his stomach tighten. In 15 years of working here, he had never been asked to check the big systems. Those were the weapons that could crack planets in half, the defenses that could stop entire fleets. They were humanity's insurance policy, and they had never been needed. "How long do we have?" he asked. "They want it done by tomorrow." Ben nodded and got to work. As he moved through the facility, turning on systems that had slept for decades, he wondered what was happening in the galaxy that made Earth's leaders so nervous. Far away, in the cold depths of space, the Zephyrian Collective was making final preparations for war. Supreme War Leader Vekvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as hundreds of warships formed into attack formation. The Zephyrians were warriors, a proud race that had conquered dozens of worlds through strength and determination. "Report," Vekvar commanded. His intelligence officer, a scarred veteran named Vekstar, stepped forward. "Our scouts confirm that human defenses are minimal. They have perhaps 50 warships scattered across their territory. Their worlds are protected by nothing more than basic planetary shields." Vekvar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "And their secret weapons? Our analysis suggests they do not exist. Humans are farmers and traders, not warriors. They have grown soft during their years of peace." This was music to Vekvar's ears. For too long, the Zephyrians had watched humans spread across the galaxy, taking the best worlds, making deals with other species, growing stronger every year. It was time to put them in their place. "Begin the attack," he ordered Dot as the Zephyrian fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading for the solar system. None of them knew they were about to wake something that had been sleeping for a very long time. They thought they were attacking a peaceful civilization. They had no idea they were about to learn why you should never push Earth too hard. The alarm started screaming at exactly 0600 hours, Solar Standard Time. Jake Morrison jerked awake in his quarters aboard Luna Defense Station as red lights flashed and a computer announced, "Unknown fleet detected. All hands to battle stations." Jake pulled on his uniform and rushed to the command center. The scene that greeted him made his blood run cold. Lieutenant Amy Walsh was staring at her sensors with wide eyes. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. 300 ships just appeared at the edge of the solar system. They're big, and they're heading straight for us. Jake looked at the display screen. The alien ships were massive, each one the size of a small city. They moved in perfect formation, like wolves hunting in a pack. Humanity had never seen anything like them before. "Any response to our communications?" Jake asked. "Nothing, sir. They're not even acknowledging that we exist." Admiral Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the communication screen. She looked calm, but Jake could see the tension in her eyes. "All stations, we are now under attack by an unknown alien force. I'm transmitting their ultimatum now." The message that followed made Jake's hands shake. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Collective. They demanded that humanity surrender all colonies beyond 20 light years from Earth. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. "Sir," Amy said quietly, "our weapons are online, but against 300 ships, double quotes. Jake nodded grimly. Luna Defense Station had 6 plasma cannons and a handful of missile tubes. They were designed to stop pirates or disable damaged ships, not fight a war. Against the alien fleet, they might as well throw rocks. Prepare all weapons," Jake ordered. "If they want to fight, we'll give them one." The first Zephyrian attack came without warning. Beams of energy lanced out from their ships. striking Luna Defense Station's shields. The entire structure shook like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Lights flickered, and Jake could hear metal groaning under the stress. Shields down to 60%. Amy reported. Jake fired back with everything they had. The plasma cannons lit up space with brilliant flashes of light, but the alien ships barely seemed to notice. Their shields absorbed the human weapons, like water soaking into sand. More energy beams struck the station. This time, something important broke. The lights went out, and Jake felt the artificial gravity fail. In the darkness, he could hear Amy crying. "Abandoned station," Jake yelled. "Everyone to the escape pods." As Jake helped his crew evacuate, he watched through the viewport as other human defenses died around. Earth, orbital platforms that had protected humanity for decades, exploded in balls of fire. Ships that had seemed so powerful just hours before were turned into drifting hulks. The attack spread quickly through human space. On the farming world of New Kansas, Lisa Parker watched the news reports with growing horror. Colony after colony fell to the Zephyrian fleet. The aliens were systematic and efficient, destroying any resistance before moving on to the next target. "Lisa," Bobby said, running up to her with a tablet in his hands, "we're getting evacuation orders. The aliens will be here in 3 days." Lisa looked around at the golden wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. This world had been her home for 35 years. The thought of abandoning it made her sick. "Start the evacuation procedures," she said quietly. "But keep the communication networks running as long as possible. The other colonies need to know what's happening." Over the next few weeks, Lisa became the unofficial voice of the human resistance. As colonies fell one by one, she coordinated refugee movements and shared intelligence. Her calm voice over the radio networks became a source of hope for millions of displaced humans. But hope was in short supply. The Zephyrians seemed unstoppable. Their technology was superior to anything humanity had ever seen. Their tactics were flawless. Worst of all, they showed no mercy. Any colony that resisted was bombarded from orbit until nothing remained but rubble. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the disaster unfold from her command center on Earth. Her small fleet was scattered across human space, trying to help where they could, but it was hopeless. The Zephyrians had more ships than humanity had bullets. "Admiral," her aide reported, "we've lost contact with the Centauri colonies. That's everything beyond the 20-light-year line." Sullivan nodded. It was exactly what the aliens had demanded. They were showing humanity that resistance was useless. Soon they would come for Earth itself. On the Zephyrian flagship, Supreme War Leader Thekvar was pleased with the progress of the invasion. The humans had fought bravely, but uselessly. Their weapons were primitive, their ships were weak, and their tactics were predictable. "Casualties?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Minimal, my lord. We've lost perhaps a dozen ships to lucky hits." "The humans have lost everything." Thekvar smiled. "This was easier than conquering a world of children. Prepare the final assault. On Earth, I want this finished quickly." But deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Ben Carter was receiving very different orders. Carol found him in the main control room, where he was running diagnostics on systems that hadn't been active in over a century. "Ben, we just got authorization codes from Earth Command," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Code level Alpha 1. Ben's hands stopped moving on the keyboard. Alpha 1 was the highest authorization level in the human military. It meant that Earth itself was in immediate danger of destruction. "All systems?" he asked. "Everything. The orbital platforms, the lunar installations, the asteroid bases. All of it." Ben took a deep breath and began entering the codes. Around him, ancient machines came to life with a deep humming sound. Lights that had been dark for decades began to glow. In hidden facilities across the solar system, weapons that had slept since humanity's violent past awakened from their long slumber. Jake Morrison, rescued from the wreckage of Luna Defense Station, found himself in a briefing room deep beneath Earth's surface. Admiral Sullivan was there, along with dozens of other officers he didn't recognize. "Gentlemen and ladies," Sullivan began, "what you are about to learn is classified at the highest levels. For over 2 centuries, humanity has maintained a fiction that we are a peaceful species. That fiction is about to end." She pressed a button, and the wall screens lit up with images that made Jake's jaw drop. Hidden weapons platforms scattered throughout human space. Ships disguised as cargo haulers that were actually warships. Colonies that looked like farming communities, but were really military bases. Every human world has the capability to become a fortress within hours, Sullivan continued. Every trade route has hidden defenses. Every peaceful farmer and merchant has military training. We are not the helpless prey the Zephyrians think we are. Jake stared at the screens in amazement. But why keep it secret? Why let them attack us? Sullivan's smile was cold as winter. Because sometimes it's better to let your enemy think they've won. The Zephyrians have spread their forces across hundreds of systems, trying to hold territory. They think they've conquered. They have no idea what's waiting for them. As the Zephyrian fleet approached Earth for what they expected to be the final battle, they had no way of knowing that they were flying into the most carefully prepared trap in galactic history. They thought they were about to crush the last resistance of a broken species. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon was not any gun or bomb, but the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to strike back. Supreme War Leader Thekvar stood on his flagship's bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. The blue planet looked peaceful and defenseless. Soon, it would burn like all the other human worlds. "Begin the demonstration bombardment," he ordered. "Target their major cities. I want the humans to see what happens when they defy the collective." The first wave of Zephyrian bombers launched from their carrier ships. 50 sleek fighters streaked toward Earth's atmosphere, their weapons charged and ready. Thekvar smiled as he watched them disappear into the planet's gravity well. Then something impossible happened. The bombers simply vanished. "Report!" Thekvar snarled at his sensor officer. "I don't understand, my lord." The fighters were there one moment, and then ... gone. No explosions, no debris, no distress signals. They just disappeared. Thekvar's eyes narrowed. "Sensor malfunction. Send another wave. Twice as many this time." 100 Zephyrian fighters dove toward Earth. They made it halfway through the atmosphere before they too vanished without a trace. Not one piece of wreckage fell to the planet below. Meanwhile, deep in his underground facility, Dr. Ben Carter watched the alien fighters disappear on his screens. The old defensive systems were working perfectly. Weapons that had been built during humanity's nuclear age were still the most advanced in the galaxy. "Phase 1 is complete," he reported to Earth Command. "All incoming threats neutralized by the gravity net." The gravity net was humanity's first line of defense around Earth. Invisible to sensors, it could bend space itself, sending attacking ships into dimensions where they would never be found. It had been built 200 years ago, when humans still fought wars against each other and needed to protect their home world. "Admiral Kate," Sullivan smiled as she received Ben's report. From her command center, she could see the confusion spreading through the Zephyrian fleet. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they were facing technology they couldn't understand. "Activate Phase 2, she ordered, across the solar system. Asteroids that had drifted silently for centuries began to change. Their rocky surfaces split open, revealing the weapons platforms hidden inside. Ancient defense satellites, disguised as space junk, powered up their weapon systems. Even Earth's moon opened like a flower, showing the massive railguns built into its core. Jake Morrison, now aboard Admiral Sullivan's command ship, watched in amazement as humanity's true defenses revealed themselves. He had spent years in the Terran Defense Force without knowing any of this existed. "How long has all this been here?" he asked. "Since the beginning," Sullivan replied. "Every generation of humans has added to it. We learned during our early wars that the best defense is one your enemy never sees coming." The Zephyrian fleet found themselves surrounded by weapons they hadn't known existed. Worse, their hyperspace drives had stopped working. Every time they tried to jump away from the solar system, their ships simply refused to move. "My lord," the navigation officer reported to Dekvar, "something is jamming our hyperspace generators. We're trapped." Dekvar felt the first stirrings of real fear. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. All ships form defensive positions. Prepare for. His order was cut off as the human weapons opened fire. The asteroid platforms unleashed streams of energy that could crack moons in half. Railguns on Earth's moon fired projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. Each shot could punch through the shields of a dozen Zephyrian ships. But the humans weren't trying to destroy the alien fleet. They were being careful, precise. Ships that surrendered were captured intact. Ships that fought back were disabled, not destroyed. It was the kind of controlled violence that only came from centuries of practice not far away on New Kansas. Lisa. Parker received a coded message that made her smile for the first time in weeks. Harvest Moon is authorized. Execute Phase 2. Harvest Moon was the code name for the colonial uprising. All across human space, the conquered colonies began to show their true nature. Farmers threw off their work clothes and revealed military uniforms underneath. Tractors transformed into tanks. Grain silos opened to reveal missile launchers. The Zephyrians had thought they were occupying helpless agricultural worlds. They were actually sitting in the middle of military bases. Lisa coordinated the uprising from her command center, which had been disguised as a grain storage facility. Her assistant Bobby turned out to be a colonel in the Terran Marines, and the simple farming equipment around them revealed hidden weapons and communication arrays. "All colonies report ready," Bobby said, no longer the nervous young man he had pretended to be. "Begin the harvest," Lisa ordered. Across 17 star systems, human colonists struck back at their occupiers. The Zephyrians had spread their forces thin, trying to control hundreds of worlds with the minimum number of troops. Now they found themselves outnumbered and outgunned on every planet they thought they had conquered. On New Kansas, Zephyrian soldiers who had been living in comfortable barracks suddenly found themselves under siege. The humans they had dismissed as harmless farmers attacked with military precision and weapons that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "This is impossible," the Zephyrian commander on New Kansas radioed to his superiors. "Intelligence said these were farmers." "They are farmers," Lisa replied, having tapped into their communications. "We're just farmers who know how to fight." Back in the solar system, the Zephyrian fleet was learning the same lesson. Admiral Sullivan had moved her command ship closer to Dekvar's flagship, and she was broadcasting on all frequencies. "Zephyrian fleet, this is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Terran Defense Force. You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated with honor." Dekvar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. Half his fleet was already captured or disabled. The weapons fire from the hidden human platforms was too accurate to dodge, too powerful to block. His mighty invasion force was being dismantled piece by piece. "How?" he whispered to himself. "How did they hide all this?" The answer came from Jake Morrison, who had been listening to the Zephyrian communications. "We didn't hide it," he broadcast. "Back, we just didn't advertise it. Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to keep the peace is to be ready for war. Dr. Ben Carter, still monitoring his ancient systems, sent regular reports to Admiral Sullivan. The weapons platforms were working perfectly, despite being centuries old. The gravity net around Earth was holding strong. Most importantly, the hyperspace jammers were keeping the Zephyrian fleet trapped in the solar system. "Admiral," he reported, "we could end this right now. One command, and their entire fleet disappears." Sullivan considered this for a moment. The weapons under her control could erase the Zephyrian collective from existence. But that wasn't the human way anymore. "Negative," she replied. "We're not conquerors. We're defenders. Keep them contained, but give them every chance to surrender." On his flagship, Ekvar watched his proud fleet being captured ship by ship. The humans were offering mercy to every crew that gave up, treating prisoners with respect and providing medical care to the wounded. It was not what he had expected from the species he thought he was conquering. "My lord," his intelligence officer said quietly, "perhaps we should consider surrender. Our forces in the colonies are reporting similar situations. The humans were ready for us." Ekvar looked around his bridge at the officers who had followed him into battle. They were warriors, but they were not fools. The humans had proven they could destroy the collective if they chose to. The fact that they were offering mercy instead spoke to a strength that went beyond weapons. "Open a channel to the human admiral," he said finally. Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen. She looked tired but determined, like someone who had never wanted to fight, but was very good at it when necessary. "I am Supreme War Leader Ekvar of the Zephyrian Collective," he said. "I would like to discuss terms of surrender." Sullivan nodded. "I'm listening." As the two leaders began to negotiate, Jake Morrison thought about everything he had learned in the past few weeks. Humanity wasn't the peaceful species he had thought they were. They were something much more dangerous and much more valuable. They were a species that had learned to control their own violent nature without losing the ability to defend themselves. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson too, and it would never be the same again. The surrender negotiations took place on neutral ground Admiral Sullivan's command ship. Ekvar arrived with a small escort, his massive form dwarfing the human officers around him. Jake Morrison stood guard, still amazed that he was witnessing the end of humanity's first galactic war. "Before we discuss terms," Sullivan said, "I want you to understand what you're really dealing with." She led the Zephyrian leader to an observation deck where they could see Earth hanging in space. It looked peaceful, but Ekvar now knew better than to trust appearances. "Every human world has been preparing for this day since we first left Earth," Sullivan explained. "We didn't build our colonies to farm or trade. We built them to survive, and if necessary, to fight." She gestured to a tactical display showing the current situation across human space. In every system the Zephyrians had thought they controlled, their forces were surrounded and cut off. Supply lines that had seemed secure were revealed to be traps. Communications networks they had relied on were actually human intelligence gathering systems. "How many soldiers do you really have?" Ekvar asked. "Every human is a soldier," Sullivan replied simply. "We just prefer other jobs." On New Kansas, Lisa Parker was proving that point. She stood in what had been a grain processing center just days ago, but which was now revealed to be a military command facility. Around her, men and women who had seemed like simple farmers were coordinating a campaign across 17 star systems. "Status report from the outer colonies," Bobby said, reading from a display screen. His transformation from nervous assistant to military colonel was complete. "Zephyrian forces on agricultural world Dakota 7 have surrendered," Lisa read from the reports flowing in. "Mining world New Montana reports successful capture of enemy supply depot. The trade station at Crossroads is now under human control. Each report told the same story. The Zephyrians had conquered empty shells, while the real human infrastructure lay hidden beneath their feet. Food processing plants were weapons factories. Grain silos were ammunition storage. Even the livestock had been genetically modified to serve as biological sensors, watching the invaders and reporting their movements. "It's incredible," whispered a captured Zephyrian officer who was listening to the reports. "You turned your entire civilization into a weapon." "No," Lisa corrected him. "We turned our civilization into a shield. The weapon was always there. We just hoped we'd never need to use it." Back on Admiral Sullivan's ship, Jake Morrison was getting his own education in human military doctrine. Dr. Ben Carter had come up from his underground facility to brief the senior officers on the systems he maintained. The asteroid platforms had been operational for 150 years. Carter explained, pointing to a star chart covered with hidden weapon positions. The gravity nets around major worlds are even older. The hyperspace jammers were the newest addition, and they're still 70 years old. "Why keep it all secret?" Jake asked. "Why not let other species know we could defend ourselves?" "Because fear makes people do stupid things," Sullivan answered. "If the galaxy knew how powerful we really were, someone would have tried to stop US before we got strong enough to be a threat. By staying hidden, we gave everyone a chance to get used to having us around." "And now?" Jake asked. "Now they know the truth. The question is what they'll do with that knowledge." The answer was already becoming clear. Deep space monitoring stations were picking up communications from across the galaxy. Other alien species had been watching the war between humans and Zephyrians with great interest. The sudden reversal of human fortune was sending shock waves through every alien government. On the homeworld of the Altarian Republic, government ministers were meeting in emergency session. They had been planning their own expansion into human space, thinking the humans were weak and divided. Now they were rapidly reconsidering their plans. "Military analysis confirms it," the defense minister reported. "The human technology we've observed is at least 2 centuries ahead of our own. Their defensive systems are beyond anything we thought possible." The Trade Federation, which had been charging humans high tariffs because they thought Earth needed the alien goods more than the aliens needed human products, was already drafting new agreements with much more favorable terms for humanity. Even the peaceful Centauran Alliance, which had maintained friendly relations with humanity, was quietly guarding their own defenses. If humans could hide this much military power behind a facade of peaceful farming, what might other species be concealing? But the most dramatic changes were happening in Zephyrian space itself. News of the fleet's defeat and the failed invasion was spreading quickly through their territory. Worlds that had been conquered by the collective decades ago were beginning to wonder if they could win their freedom. On the mining world of Kepler Prime, which had been under Zephyrian control for 30 years, the local population was watching human news broadcasts with growing excitement. If the humans could defeat the mighty collective fleet, perhaps other species could find their freedom too. Vic Var was learning about these developments as the surrender negotiations continued. His intelligence officers were reporting rebellions breaking out across collective space. Worlds that had been quiet for decades were suddenly declaring independence. Ships that had served the collective faithfully were switching sides. "Your victory is destroying my empire," he told Admiral Sullivan during one of their meetings. "Your empire was built on fear," she replied. "We're just showing the galaxy that there are alternatives to being afraid." The negotiations themselves were unlike anything Vic Var had expected. The humans weren't demanding tribute or territory. They weren't even asking for the Zephyrians to be punished for their attack. Instead, they wanted something much more radical. They wanted the collective to change. "We're proposing a transformation of your entire government structure," Sullivan explained. No more conquered worlds. No more forced tribute. Your member species would have the right to choose their own governments and make their own decisions about whether to remain with the collective. That would end the collective as we know it, Ekvar protested. Yes, Sullivan agreed. It would end the collective as a conquering empire and turn it into something new. A voluntary association of worlds working together for mutual benefit. And if we refuse? Sullivan's expression didn't change, but Ekvar could feel the threat behind her calm words. Then you'll discover that what you've seen so far was just us being polite. To emphasize the point, Dr. Carter activated one of his deeper systems. On the tactical displays, a new class of weapons appeared. These weren't the defensive platforms or asteroid bases that had already shocked the Zephyrians. These were weapons that could destroy stars, collapse hyperspace routes, or strip the atmosphere from entire worlds. These are our insurance policies, Carter explained quietly. Built during our worst wars, when we thought we might need to destroy ourselves to keep our enemies from winning. We've never used them, but they're still there. Ekvar stared at the display in horror. The humans had weapons that could end entire civilizations, and they had kept them hidden for centuries. Worse, they had chosen not to use them even when their own worlds were being conquered. Why? He whispered. Why show mercy when you have the power to destroy us all? Jake Morrison, who had been listening to the entire conversation, spoke up. Because that's who we are. We learned a long time ago that the strongest person in the room doesn't have to prove it by hurting everyone else. Admiral Sullivan nodded. Power without restraint is just destruction. We have the strength to break the galaxy, but we choose to protect it instead. That's what makes us human. As the talks continued, reports kept coming in from across human space. The colonial uprising was complete. Every Zephyrian force had either surrendered or been captured. The invasion that was supposed to humble humanity had instead revealed them as the most powerful species in the known galaxy. But with that revelation came responsibility. Other species were looking to humanity for leadership, for protection, for guidance. The quiet farmers and traders who had spread across the stars were now the galaxy's reluctant guardians. The age of human innocence was over. The age of human responsibility had begun. And in the depths of space, other alien empires were already beginning to plan how they would deal with this new reality. Some sought alliance with the newly revealed human power. Others began developing weapons to challenge it. The galaxy would never be the same. And humanity was about to learn that being the strongest species brought challenges they had never imagined. 6 months after the Zephyrian surrender, the galaxy looked very different. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned battleship Defiance, watching as former Zephyrian worlds celebrated their independence. He wore the uniform of a rear admiral now, one of the youngest in human history. The transformation had been faster than anyone expected. The Zephyrian collective had officially dissolved itself, replaced by the Zephyrian Federation, a voluntary union of worlds that chose cooperation over conquest. Ekvar himself had become the Federation's first elected leader, working to undo decades of imperial oppression. Still hard to believe, isn't it? Said a familiar voice behind him. Jake turned to see Admiral Sullivan approaching. She looked older now, carrying the weight of humanity's new role in galactic affairs. As the first human to command an interstellar peacekeeping force, she had become one of the most important people in the galaxy. Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream, Jake admitted. 6 months ago, I was guarding a space station where nothing ever happened. Now I'm supposed to help keep peace between a dozen different species. Sullivan smiled. Welcome to the burden of being strong. When you have the power to stop fights, everyone expects you to do it. She was right. In the months since the Zephyrian defeat, humanity had been called upon to mediate disputes, protect trade routes, and prevent 3 different wars from starting. The galaxy had quickly learned that humans were not just powerful, they were fair, patient, and surprisingly good at solving problems without violence. On New Kansas, Lisa Parker was discovering the same thing. Her new title was Governor General of Liberated Territories, and she was responsible for helping former Zephyrian colonies transition to self-governance. It was a job that required all the organizational skills she had developed as a farmer, plus a few new ones. "Ma'am," said Bobby, who was now her official deputy, "we're getting reports from the Rigel system. The mining guilds and the agricultural cooperatives are arguing about water rights again." Lisa sighed. "Set up a mediation conference and see if we can get some hydrologists from Earth to review the technical data. Sometimes people fight because they don't understand the real situation." This was the new reality of human power. Instead of conquering worlds, humans were being asked to help run them. Instead of demanding tribute, they were providing aid and expertise. It was exhausting, but Lisa found it strangely satisfying. The hardest part was dealing with species that didn't trust human motives. The Vorthan Empire, which bordered human space, had spent months waiting for humanity to demand territory or tribute as payment for their military protection. When no such demands came, they became even more suspicious. They must want something, the Vorthan ambassador had insisted during a recent meeting. No species becomes this powerful without wanting to use that power. Lisa had tried to explain that humans had learned the difference between strength and dominance through bitter experience. Their own history was full of examples of what happened when power was used without wisdom. But some aliens found human restraint more frightening than human weapons. Dr. Ben Carter was facing different challenges. As head of the new Galactic Defense Initiative, he was responsible for sharing human defensive technology with other species, but only the peaceful parts. The weapons that could destroy stars remained hidden, known only to a few dozen people across human space. "We're walking a fine line," he explained to a gathering of human military leaders. "Share too little, and other species feel helpless against future threats. Share too much, and we might create new threats ourselves." The solution they had developed was elegant. Humans would build defensive platforms around alien worlds that requested protection, but the platforms remained under human control. It provided security without spreading dangerous technology. Some species had objected to this arrangement, but recent events had proven its wisdom. The Corvani Republic had tried to build their own versions of human gravity nets using stolen technical data. The result had been a disaster that almost tore their homeworld apart. Only rapid intervention by human engineers had prevented a catastrophe that would have killed billions. Meanwhile, the broader galactic community was still adjusting to the new balance of power. The Galactic Trade Council had rewritten its charter to give humanity equal representation with species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years. The Interspecies Court had added human judges to handle disputes involving military matters. Most importantly, the Galactic Defense Treaty had been signed by 47 different species. It established humanity as the primary peacekeeping force in the galaxy, with the responsibility to protect smaller species from conquest or genocide. In return, other species agreed to submit major disputes to human-mediated arbitration. Admiral Sullivan often wondered if this was what humanity had been meant for all along. Their history was full of conflict, but it was also full of people who had learned to turn enemies into allies, who had found ways to build peace from the ashes of war. "We're not perfect," she had told the Galactic Assembly during the treaty signing ceremony. "Our own world bears the scars of countless wars, but we learned something from those wars that many species never get the chance to learn. That strength without mercy is not strength at all. It's just destruction wearing a crown." The words had become famous across the galaxy. They were carved into monuments on a dozen worlds, translated into hundreds of languages, and taught to children of species that had never heard of Earth just a year before. Jake Morrison kept a copy of the speech on his desk as he dealt with the daily challenges of his new position. Today's crisis involved a border dispute between two species that had been enemies for centuries. Both sides had agreed to human mediation, but neither trusted the other enough to meet in the same room. "This is going to take weeks," his aide complained as they reviewed the diplomatic files. "Probably," Jake agreed, "but it's better than the alternative." Before humans got involved, disputes like this were settled by whoever had the bigger fleet. Now we actually tried to find solutions that work for everyone. It wasn't always successful. Some conflicts were too deep, too old, or too complicated for even human patience to solve. But more often than not, the combination of human fairness and human military power convinced disputants to at least try negotiation before resorting to violence. The galaxy was becoming a more peaceful place, but it was also becoming more complicated. New alliances formed and dissolved regularly. Species that had been enemies for millennia were learning to work together. Trade routes that had been closed for centuries were reopening, and through it all, humans found themselves at the center of everything, trying to balance the needs of dozens of different species while maintaining their own principles. Lisa Parker summed up the challenge during a speech to the Colonial Administration Council. "We never wanted to be the galaxy's policemen. We just wanted to farm our crops and raise our children in peace. But when someone threatens that peace for us or for anyone else, we have a responsibility to act." She paused, looking out at an audience that included representatives from 20 different species. "We have the power to impose our will on the galaxy. Instead, we choose to use that power to help the galaxy find its own way to peace. That's not always easy, and it's not always popular, but it's who we are." The applause that followed was genuine, coming from beings who had seen humanity at its strongest and found them worthy of trust. It was a trust that would be tested again and again in the years to come as new threats emerged and old ones resurfaced. But for now, the galaxy was at peace. Children played safely on worlds that had known only war. Merchants traveled routes that had been closed by conflict for centuries. Scientists from dozens of species worked together on projects that would benefit everyone. And in the depths of space, the ancient weapons that humanity had built during its darkest days remained silent and hidden, waiting for a threat dire enough to justify their use. Everyone hoped that day would never come. But if it did, the galaxy would learn once again why you should never push Earth too hard. The age of human dominance had begun not with conquest, but with protection. Not with fear, but with respect. And in the end, that made all the difference. As Admiral Sullivan often said in her final reports to Earth Command, "We have become what we always had the potential to be, not the galaxy's masters, but its guardians." And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all.